the boy everyone adored, who quietly slipped away. Jonathan Brandis was once everywhere. Teenage hearts aflutter, faces on magazine covers, thousands of fan letters piling in weekly. At 17, he was Lucas Wolinchak on Sequest DSV, the beloved scientific prodigy in a Spielberg-backed TV series, becoming one of the 90s teen idols overnight. But fame arrived too young and faded too fast. By his mid-20s, roles dwindled. One of his hopes, Hart's War, vanished from the final cut. The pilot 111 Gramercy Park, his next lifeline, wasn't picked up. The spotlight that once defined him dimmed. Friends say that behind his polite smile, Jonathan was worn down by rejection and by drinking to dull the pain. His father later confided that he, in his 20s, showed signs of manic depression, suspecting bipolar disorder, left undiagnosed and untreated. On November 11, 2003, at 27, he was found unconscious in his Los Angeles hallway. He died the next day. No fanfare, no warning, just the end of a boy who burned too bright too soon. This is the story of Jonathan Brandis, from idol to isolation, from light to gone. Jonathan Gregory Brandis was born on April 13, 1976, in Danbury, Connecticut. An only child, he grew up in a middle-class home. His mother, Mary, was a teacher, and his father, Greg, was a firefighter. They weren't a showbiz family, but they saw something in him early, a natural charm, a confidence in front of people that most kids didn't have. At just 2 years old, Jonathan was modeling for Buster Brown shoes. By 4, he was acting in commercials, selling breakfast cereal, toys, and anything else his bright smile could sell. Even then, he seemed to understand the camera, not just posing for it, but performing. When he was 6, he landed his first big role as Kevin Buchanan on the daytime soap One Life to Live. For a child actor, it was a professional training ground, learning to hit marks, deliver lines, and adapt quickly. But it also meant long hours, discipline, and a sense of responsibility far beyond his age. By the time he was 9, the Brandis family made a life-changing decision. They packed up and moved to Los Angeles. It was a gamble, but Hollywood offered opportunities that Connecticut never could. Jonathan attended the San Fernando Valley Professional School, designed for working actors, balancing his studies with a growing list of TV credits. He became a familiar face on primetime. Who's the Boss? Full House, L.A. Law, Murder, She Wrote, The Wonder Years. The roles were small, but his professionalism stood out. Directors remembered him. Casting agents began to see him not just as a cute kid, but as someone who could handle more. These years weren't just about building a resume. They were shaping the way Jonathan saw himself. Each role was proof that he could make it in Hollywood, and each audition a reminder that everything could disappear as quickly as it came. That quiet awareness of how fragile success could be would stay with him for the rest of his life. "1990 was the year that everything shifted for Jonathan Brandis. That spring, he was cast as Bill Denbrough in the TV miniseries Stephen King's IT. Bill wasn't just another part, he was the emotional center of the story. A boy grieving his murdered brother, carrying a stutter that made every word a battle.
It's not a man. It.
For a 14-year-old, it was a daunting assignment. Jonathan approached it with precision, studying real speech patterns, making sure the stutter felt natural, not forced. On screen, it worked. You could feel Bill's frustration, his quiet courage. Critics noticed. Casting directors did too. The same year, he was chosen to lead The Never-Ending Story 2 as Bastian Balthazar Bucks. The role put his face on posters in theaters around the world. The film didn't match the box office of the original, but that didn't matter. Jonathan had gone from TV guest spots to cinematic leading man. In 1992, he teamed up with Chuck Norris in Sidekicks, blending action and heart. Training in martial arts for the film, he performed many of his own stunts. It showed a different side of him, one that could hold his own alongside an action legend. Then came the real turning point. In 1993, Steven Spielberg's name was attached to a new NBC science fiction series, Sequest DSV. It was pitched as an underwater Star Trek, and at its core was a teenage computer prodigy, Lucas Wolinchak. a role Spielberg wanted Jonathan for. At 17, he became not just part of a major network show, but its most marketable star. The effect was immediate. He was on the cover of every teen magazine: Tiger Beat, Bop, 16 magazine. Up to 4,000 fan letters arrived each week. At public appearances, security had to clear paths through screaming crowds. Malls in Australia were packed wall to wall just to see him wave. Jonathan handled it with grace in public, articulate in interviews, endlessly polite with fans. But privately, it was overwhelming. The hours on set were long, the promotional commitments constant. More than that, people began to conflate him with Lucas, expecting the same genius, the same boyish optimism. For a teenager still figuring himself out, it was a strange kind of trap. The world loved a version of him that didn't fully exist. It was the apex of his young career. Every door seemed open. Yet in the shadow of that success, the first seeds of pressure and isolation were already taking root, seeds that would grow quietly in the years to come. By late 1993, Jonathan Brandis was living the kind of fame most young actors only imagine. He was the breakout star of Sequest DSV, a primetime sci-fi drama backed by Steven Spielberg. And for NBC, he wasn't just part of the cast. He was the face of the show. His presence dominated teen culture: magazine covers, talk shows, mall appearances where screaming fans packed every floor. Studios counted fan mail by the thousands each week. Public events needed security to guide him through. In every interview, he was poised, articulate, and charming. A professional in a world that rarely expected professionalism from a teenager. But the job had shifted. Acting was now just one part of the role. There were early morning radio hits, late-night talk shows, and photo shoots crammed between filming days. The network needed him to be more than an actor. He was a brand ambassador for their multi-million-dollar gamble. Behind the scenes, Sequest was far less stable. Creative direction swung between hard science and spectacle. Writers came and went. The production's move from Los Angeles to Orlando disrupted lives and routines, and tensions simmered among cast and crew. Jonathan coped the only way he knew: by working harder. He studied camera work, shadowed directors, and treated his co-writing credit on The Siamese Dream as a chance to prove himself beyond the role of Lucas Wolinchak. Yet a subtler challenge was emerging: the gap between the character the world loved and the person he actually was. Fans adored Lucas for his decency and brilliance, and the industry valued Jonathan for the same traits. But that meant staying in the safe, marketable box they had built for him. Away from the spotlight, he looked for something untouched by the machine. In Florida, he and his father made quiet visits to children's hospitals. He would spend hours with young patients, not as a celebrity doing a photo op, but as a friend, sitting on their beds, talking about movies and school, listening to their stories. A hospital staffer later recalled his profound gentleness and patience, his ability to connect with these children on a deeply human level. It revealed a core truth about him. He craved genuine connection, an authenticity that his life as a teen idol could never provide. The smile on the magazine cover was for everyone, but these quiet moments of empathy were his own. Still, the tide was shifting. Ratings began to slide. NBC pushed for changes: younger cast members, bigger action, less science. By its third season, Sequest had lost much of what made it unique. When cancellation came, it was no surprise to those on set, but it left Jonathan facing an abrupt truth. The role that had made him a household name had also trapped him. Casting directors still saw Lucas, not the versatile actor he wanted to become. The phone didn't go silent, but the offers were more of the same. And Jonathan knew that if he couldn't break the mold soon, the career he had built since childhood might slowly start to fade. When Sequest DSV wrapped in 1996, Jonathan Brandis was only 20 years old, still young by any standard, but already carrying the weight of a decade in the industry. From the outside, it looked like the next chapter should have been easy. Take the momentum, move into adult roles, keep climbing. But Hollywood doesn't work that way. The transition from teen idol to serious adult actor is one of the most treacherous shifts in show business. For every Leonardo DiCaprio who navigates it successfully, There are dozens who disappear from the screen. Casting directors remembered Jonathan fondly, but remembered him as Lucas Wolinchak. They saw the boy on the Sequest posters, not a man ready to tackle complex adult roles. Jonathan knew the risk and tried to fight it. He sought out projects that could break the mold, smaller films with edgier stories, supporting roles that stripped away the boy genius image. He landed parts in Outside Providence and Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil, proving he could hold his own alongside established stars. But these roles, while respected, didn't capture the same wide audience that had adored him on television. By the turn of the millennium, the phone wasn't ringing as often. Some projects never saw the light of day, like Bad Girls from Valley High, which sat unreleased for years. Others, like the pilot 111 Gramercy Park, fell apart before they could air. Each disappointment chipped away at the sense of momentum he had worked so hard to build. The harshest blow came in 2002. Jonathan was cast in Hart's War, a high-profile World War II drama, starring Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. For him, it was more than just a job. It was a chance to reintroduce himself to Hollywood. He threw himself into the role, hoping this could be the turning point. But when the film premiered, most of his performance was gone. His scenes had been cut down to almost nothing. For an actor already struggling to be seen as relevant, it was a public erasure. Friends later said that Hart's War was a turning point, not because it reignited his career, but because it deepened the doubt. The industry's message felt unmistakable. They weren't looking for Jonathan Brandis anymore. The work slowed. Rejections piled up. And in a business where momentum is everything, Jonathan felt himself drifting toward the margins. For someone who had spent nearly his entire life working, the absence of a role was more than unemployment. It was the loss of identity. He still took meetings. He still read scripts. But beneath the professional persistence, there was a growing weight. Friends noticed he was drinking more. The easy confidence that had carried him through fan mobs and press tours was harder to find. Even when he was out with people, he seemed somewhere else, half in the conversation, half in his own thoughts. This was the quiet part of a career's decline. No headlines, no scandals, just the slow erosion of opportunity. But for Jonathan, it wasn't just a career problem. It was the start of something deeper and far harder to reverse. By the early 2000s, Jonathan Brandis was fighting on two fronts: the public battle to stay relevant in an industry that had moved on, and the private battle to hold on to himself. On paper, there were still jobs. The long-delayed Bad Girls from Valley High was finally inching toward release, and there were occasional auditions. But the big breaks were gone. Friends say that during this time, he carried himself with the same politeness he'd always had. But the spark had dulled. He was drinking more heavily, sometimes showing up to gatherings with a half-empty bottle already in hand. What had once been a way to relax after a long day now looked more like self-medication. A friend would later recall, he said he was tired of trying. We didn't realize how serious it was. There were still moments of focus. In 2002, Jonathan was cast in Puerto Vallarta Squeeze, alongside Harvey Keitel. On set, he was professional, engaged, even inspiring to some of the crew. Keitel himself reportedly told the producers, "This kid is good." For those who saw him work, it was proof he still had the talent. But for Jonathan, talent was no longer the issue. It was belief, his own and the industry's. Then came the role he quietly pinned his hopes on, Hart's War. It had the kind of prestige that could spark a comeback. But when the final cut reduced his part to almost nothing, it was more than a professional setback. It was, to him, confirmation of the fear that had been whispering for years. They don't want you anymore. Even in private, he didn't dwell on his struggles in a way that invited help. He kept things light, brushed off concern, changed the subject. Some friends saw the cracks. Most assumed he'd push through like he always had. His parents later said they hadn't noticed any clear signs. On November 11th, 2003, he spent time with friends at his Los Angeles apartment. He'd been drinking and talking about his career, how things weren't working out, how tired he felt. At some point, he left the room. When his friends realized he'd been gone too long, they went looking. They found him in the hallway, unconscious. He had attempted to take his own life, paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. For a few hours, there was hope, but the damage was too severe. Jonathan Brandis died the next day, November 12, 2003. He was 27 years old. There was no note, only silence, and the questions it left behind. For the fans who'd grown up with him, it felt like losing someone they knew. For those close to him, it was a loss compounded by the feeling that they should have seen more, done more.
Jonathan Brandis. I see you on Sequest, and I want to be there with you.
And for Hollywood, it was another reminder of a truth it rarely admits. The business builds its brightest young stars in a way that makes them impossible to sustain. Jonathan Brandis' story is often reduced to a headline, a teen idol from the 90s who took his own life at 27. But that's not the truth that matters. The real story is slower, more human. It's about what happens when a boy grows up in the glare of the spotlight, only to find that once it moves on, no one has taught him how to live in the dark. At his height, he was adored by millions, not just for his talent, but for the warmth and intelligence he projected. Fans saw a friend in him. Co-stars saw a professional who came prepared, who cared about the work. Behind the scenes, in children's hospitals and quiet conversations, he revealed the part of himself that no magazine cover could capture. A deep need for connection that was real, unperformed. But Hollywood rarely values the person behind the product. The industry that had built him into a star struggled to see him as anything else. And for Jonathan, the gap between how the world saw him and how he saw himself became harder to bridge. In the end, there was no scandal, no public collapse, just the slow wearing down of someone who had given everything to a system that could not give back what he truly needed. Jonathan once said in an interview that he wanted to be remembered as a good man, not just a famous one. By that measure, he succeeded. He was kind. He was generous. He was loyal to his friends. And he left behind work and memories that still mean something to the people who saw themselves in him. His story is a reminder that fame is not a shield against loneliness, and that the brightest smiles can hide the deepest shadows. It's also a quiet plea to look closer, to listen longer, and to believe someone when they say they're not okay, because the spotlight always moves on. And when it does, what's left is the person, fragile, flawed, and still deserving of being seen.
When I hear Jonathan's recordings over and over and the amount of love that was there, and that he must have been going through so much pain.